Now, Saudi Arabia doesn't have a Real Madrid, perhaps, but it does quite literally have perhaps Real Madrid's most decorated ever player in Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, obviously, his arrival's had a huge impact on the league, to say the least. I think back to Al Nassr's social media following. I think on Instagram before he joined, it was around 800,000, and you look at it within days of him signing was over 8 million, and I just checked yesterday it was over 21 million followers. Um, but I think you look at his arrival, and if you like the Ronaldo effect, to what extent has the Ronaldo effect or his arrival been a real catalyst for Saudi Arabia, both in the promotion of the Saudi Pro League and also in its quest to host the World Cup, which is now obviously proven to be successful?
What I think Cristiano Ronaldo has done, apart from all the usual discussion around him and shirt sales and social media numbers and whatever, is that Cristiano Ronaldo has conferred legitimacy on the Saudi Pro League, and I'm sure he's earning a nice salary and he's getting a good commission on appearances in Saudi tourism videos and so forth. But he basically has sent a signal to other players and to coaches that it's okay to come here, and you can come here and still be high profile. You can come here and still play a decent quality of football. You can come here and still play in international club tournaments. You can come here and still play for your national team. So, don't worry, everyone. Try it. And this is why it as the year has unfolded, we've still had those players, like Jordan Henderson, for example, past his prime, looking for one last big payoff. But we've also had younger players, and not just high-profile younger players as well. Kind of younger players from, for example, Europe, with the potential to do well at a top level. And the reason that they are there, I think, is because the original foundation for them to think, okay, this is a legitimate destination for me. This is a destination that is going to help promote my career rather than undermine my career. I think that has been provided by Ronaldo.
Certainly seems that way. I think definitely in terms of perception, you kind of look at the kind of sneering take a lot of people had on Ronaldo's transfer to signing with Al Nassr about a year ago. And I think in terms of people thinking, okay, he's gone there because his career's over. But then I think a few months later, when you see the influx of players such as Benzema, who literally just won the Ballon d'Or less than 12 months beforehand, and you look at Neymar as well, and you look at Riyad Mahrez, Sadio Mane, some of the players in their prime, it certainly seems to be a shift.
I challenge football quiz experts anywhere in the world to, when they hear this, to name the starting 11 of Al Hilal in the Champions League final earlier this year when they played Urawa Red Diamonds of Japan. The Red Diamonds won. They won the Asian Champions League. The reason for saying this is that and people in Europe and people in the global north may not like this, but football does exist in the rest of the world, and in many countries across the rest of the world, it's existed for a long time, and so what I think Saudi Arabia is doing now, but what Qatar did before, and what clubs like Urawa Red Diamonds are doing, and for that matter, what players like Mitoma at Brighton are doing, is they're alerting people in the global north to the fact that football exists elsewhere in the world. And people are just as passionate, they're just as fervent, they're just as likely to go and watch games played by their teams as we are. We are living in a changing world where we're fast becoming aware that other people in other countries, that aren't England, that aren't Germany, that aren't Spain, that aren't France, that aren't Italy, other countries in the world, people are just as passionate about football as we are, if not more so.
Do you think that's maybe the main misconception here with regards to Saudi Arabia and football?
To an extent, yes, but Saudi Arabia's got a big challenge. So, those kind of big Riyadh derby games, the the big Jeddah derby, kind of Jeddah Riyadh teams. This is kind of Arsenal, Manchester United type games. Attendance has always been healthy. So in the big urban population centres of Saudi Arabia, people love football and people go to football games. There's an interesting change, of course, over the last 5 years, because now women can go to those football games. Prior to 2018, they couldn't go to those football games. So, that's something else to consider as well. But the biggest challenge for Saudi Arabia is once you get outside the big urban centres, the attendance at football matches falls away really, really, really badly. And so you are talking about, in some cases, I saw a number for a game recently in which Etifak, which is Steven Gerrard and Jordan Henderson's club, were playing. There were fewer than 1,000 people attending a Saudi Pro League game. So you do have this this strange situation where you've got, on the one hand, Saudi Pro League games that are rivaling Premier League games in terms of spectator numbers, but then I think I saw on Twitter somebody saying, this is not even English 7th or 8th division. You've then got games in the Saudi Pro League where you get fewer than 1,000 people there. So the big challenge for Saudi Arabia is not just to host the World Cup or to get Al Nassr to the Asian Champions League final. It's also a case of how are you going to fill your stadiums. So capacity utilisation of stadiums in the Saudi Pro League can be as low as 5%. In other words, 5% of tickets are sold. The other 95% aren't. Stadiums are empty. So going back to the point when we were talking about metrics, this is another metric. In terms of observing Saudi Arabia, this is another metric. Are you filling your stadiums? Because at the moment they're not.
I think I saw one report the other day where it's like as low as 138 or something like that. Whether or not that was true, I think that's certainly the area where you look, because obviously when you're looking at the growth of sport in a region, you have to look at the multi-metrics, and I think certainly in attendance that seems to be the one that's kind of lagging, I guess, here. Do you think that there's perhaps a cultural reason for that? I guess when you look at you mentioned, for example, with it could be a 7th tier game in the UK and people would still go to that, but I guess it's so rooted in what people would do, I suppose, with their time in terms of investing in these clubs and the impact they have in their communities. Do you think there's a degree of that comes into it, and maybe in a few years' time, attendances will see a huge rise in Saudi Arabia?
I think there are lots of issues there. There are issues like, in 2018, suddenly women were told you can go to football matches. And I can imagine the response of lots of Saudi Arabian people would have been, well, right, okay, thanks, but no thanks, I don't really want to go to a football match. So, there's that. I think there is something about attitudes and behaviours that is still a work in progress inside Saudi Arabia. There is no doubt that, again, in certain parts of the country, there are other things to do. And certainly if you go to downtown Riyadh, there are some fantastic shopping malls to go to. Why would you go and watch a football match out in the open when possibly it's very, very hot, when you can go and look at some very nice shops and eat some very nice food in an air-conditioned mall? So, there's that kind of thing. I think one of the other things that perhaps a lot of people don't realise is we're at the start of an infrastructural journey in Saudi Arabia, and what I mean by that is often stadiums are not great. So why would you go and stand on a concrete terrace in the heat watching a football match? What when you could stay at home and watch Netflix, or when you could drive your brand new car around the town? But also the physical process of getting to venues is difficult. So several months ago, I was in Saudi Arabia and I tried to get to the King Abdullah Stadium because I wanted to go and look at the King Abdullah Stadium. There's no game on. That was just a nightmare. Trying to get there is unless you're prepared to pay a taxi, which can sometimes be very expensive, it's not easy to get there. Even in Riyadh, the Riyadh metro network still isn't functioning properly. The new Riyadh network, metro network, still isn't functioning properly. So there are infrastructural issues there. I think there is an issue with fan culture because historically fan culture has been very urban and very male. And there is the kind of banter, as we would call it in Britain, between fans, but it tends to be between young men online in urban centres. Now, the fact that I emphasise online, a lot of Saudi Arabian fandom is online. It's not necessarily inside stadiums. You've also got to keep in mind that Saudi Arabians, they typically tend to support 4 teams. They'll support a domestic club team, their domestic national team, but then an overseas club team and an overseas national team. So if you are, let's imagine you're the marketing manager for Al Nassr, you're not just competing against your Saudi Arabian club rivals, you're also competing against Real Madrid and you're competing against England and Germany. So there are a number of different challenges that I think in combination that mean that, number one, Saudi Arabia's got a big job ahead of it, and number two, for all of us who are sat here thinking, well, they're just going to buy their way to success, success is not a foregone conclusion because there are some major challenges and obstacles that the country has to deal with.
So it certainly seems like it. I guess we'll have to see if the fan cultures do sort of have an impact or continue to have one, especially with regards to attendance. I think with regards to infrastructure as well, it certainly seems as though if they're sort of at the start of that journey. But I think coming back to the players that we're seeing in the Saudi Pro League, I think when you look at the salaries, it's well. There's some big numbers. I think you mentioned earlier with Ronaldo, for instance, his salary is reportedly $260 million a year, according to Forbes, making him the world's highest paid footballer. You have Neymar then ranking at third with $112 million, and Benzema earning close to that as well with $106 million a year. So I guess it's easy to say that a dominant factor, or perhaps the main factor in securing these players, would be some of these contracts you see. But is there not an element of Saudi Arabia kind of setting itself apart from European leagues? I mean, how can European clubs compete with those salaries?
How can Polish clubs compete with Premier League salaries? How can Lithuanian clubs compete with Premier League salaries? How can Maltese clubs compete with Premier League salaries? I've used this phrase often. It's an inconvenient truth in life that some people have power and some people don't. I do find the consternation amongst fans of English Premier League clubs, somewhat strange, because the way in which we now look at Saudi Arabia, people have been looking at us for nearly 30 years now. How can this be? How is this fair? How come they've got more money? How come they always benefit from payouts from UEFA and we don't? So let's all have a sense of perspective in this. The harsh reality is, and this is a harsh reality, is that the world is changing. The pivot from north to south is taking place. New centres of economic power are emerging. Saudi Arabia, as a country, has huge oil and gas reserves that Britain doesn't have. So therefore, it doesn't have to make the harsh choices that we face. So all of this may seem strange and unusual and uncomfortable, but this is the harsh reality of 21st century life. And if I may say this, instead of us sitting here and complaining about it, we can't stop this. As a single country, as Britain, we can't stop this. And my view would be, even the European Union as a collective. The European Union can't stop these giga changes taking place. So what we need to be doing, either as a country or as the European Union or as the global north, we need to be thinking about, well, how are we going to respond to this? What are the policy responses? Are we happy that Saudi Arabia is buying up lots and lots of sports assets? How are we going to respond to that? Do we want to stop it? Okay, if you want to stop it, then how are you going to stop it? And once you've tried to stop it, what are going to be the consequences of you trying to stop it? And are you prepared to handle those consequences? Or, are you going to work with Saudi Arabia? Are you going to be a willing partner? Are you going to be a willing ally? And what are the consequences of doing that? And are you happy with those consequences? And this is when you begin to talk in terms of, what is a fit and proper owner? We're talking about the owners and directors test. Do you think about human rights and whose human rights? And if we're imposing human rights conditions on Saudi Arabian investors, what if they say, well, okay, we won't invest our money with your country, we'll go somewhere else? How do we respond to that? How do we feel about that? So instead of sitting around complaining as a group of countries in the global north, start talking about what are the solutions, not what the problems are, start talking about the solutions. And I think one of the things for me, that's the speed with which Saudi Arabia has intervened in football this year, one of the big issues that this has caused us in the global north is we've been caught napping, we've been caught sleeping, and you hear on radio shows and on social media platforms and podcasts, football players and former football players and officials saying, "Oh, it's a terrible thing. Saudi Arabia, it's a terrible, terrible thing." Okay, if it's a terrible thing, what are your solutions to the problem? And what I don't hear from people in football is people talking about solutions.